Rohitesh Dhawan, who's resource economist at KPMG, Alishia head of the Green Industry Strategic Business Unit at the IDC, are still with me here at the KPMG headquarters, and Carlo van Wangeningen, who's chairman of the Lake Turkana Wind Power Consortium, now joins our conversation from our studios in Nairobi, Kenya as well. Thanks so much, Carlo, for joining us today. Well, we've been talking about the need to see, the demonstration of working examples of renewable energy products, just how much benefit it's bringing. And you head up the Lake Turkana Wind Power Consortium. What exactly are we looking at there, and how is that working for Kenya in the renewable energy space?
Thank you, and good morning. Well, we are looking at a 300 megawatt wind power plant in northern Kenya, off the shores of Lake Turkana, where we have extremely good wind regimes. We are looking at a very challenging project, and right now we can say we're very thankful for the enormous support that the Kenya government has provided this project, which without it could not have happened, precisely because of important challenges, logistical challenges, which required various licenses for upgrading of roads that we need to undertake, the fact that we have to connect to a grid which is 428 kilometers away, and that means installing a transmission line of that size. So we had to involve various departments of government, and we have found really cooperation from every part of it.
Well, let's drill down a little further there. When it comes down to it, every investor that's looking to play in this energy space is looking for certainty, it's looking for clarity. They want to know what the commercial rules of the game are. They want to know that they're going to be operating on a level playing field as well, and that assets and intellectual property are going to be protected. So to what extent does policy in Kenya answer those questions for you as an investor?
Well, to a great extent, in the energy sector, we found that they're very responsive. Indeed, there is still some ground to cover. I believe that today, where we stand on this project, and we've been at it and working at it for the past 6 years on developing it, we could perhaps have shortened the time if certain tools were clearer and put in place in advance in readiness for investments of this kind. I refer particularly to the fact that seeing the perceived risk that the financial sector has on a country like Kenya, or in Africa in general, I would say, there's always a requirement for government guarantees or some form of government support. And this has been a real challenge for us, which has caused some serious delay in reaching the stage we are of the project, and being able to really fully engage with the lender community to reach a financial close on the project. The guarantees that are required sometimes could also be relented a little bit on the part of financiers, especially here I refer to development financial institutions, who by the very term of development, they should be a little more or less risk adverse towards the country risk level, as that's probably their main ground of investment. So I think there needs to be a little more participation and a consultation between governments and the DFIs in order to come up with a longer lasting solution and not ad hoc solutions.
Well, having said all that we have over the past 35 minutes or so, Rencha, I mean, to what extent do we have to be cautious about renewables as well, simply because we don't have a track record available for technical or commercial viability at this stage, especially when it comes to large-scale wind and solar power on the continent?
it's important that we as a country are cautious, and when we develop the process that we are clear and comfortable and confident that it will actually transgress to the point where you have tangible projects that you can implement. Very important for us in this country is you don't want to start a project and have it like a flagship project, your first one or two, and then the project doesn't really work technically or doesn't come off or can't really supply continuously to the grid. And I think that's making it more difficult at this point in time to develop projects, to ensure that when you have that project in place one day, or hopefully quite soon, that it is a flagship project and something that the country could be proud of to be able to build the next 2 or 3 projects on.
We touched on earlier, Roitesh, having unrealistic expectations, and where we get given examples out of Europe, for example, where Denmark is a case in point, it uses renewables. It's part of an interconnected European system. That's effectively what we're looking at there. When wind is not blowing in Denmark, they draw nuclear power from another territory, fossil power from Poland comes into play, and that is a system that we simply don't have in place on the African continent. We're far from that interconnectedness, so to speak. How much of a challenge is that right now?
I think you're correct, Alishia. It is a challenge, but there are ways that you can manage that. An example would be the use of gas. We've seen worldwide a push towards the use of gas for electricity because it's 40% more carbon efficient than coal. And what it helps us achieve is the provision of baseload power, but also helps you balance out your grid, especially when you have a large mix of solar in your renewable energy mix. And I think we'll see a lot more investments in gas security in Africa, and I think that's one of the ways we can stabilize the grid.
Well, we seem to be having a problem with your mic. Sorry to interrupt, so we're going to have to use that.
So the stabilization of the grid, I think, is a critical component here. We've seen gas being a significant way that you can achieve that stabilization, and I think with intelligent controls, even amongst renewable energy mixes themselves domestically, it is possible to ensure that the supply is maintained. And in the procurement process for NERSA, there is a component of stability of grid which affects the renewable energy projects that get procured to start with.
Well, Carlo, let's bring it to you. I mean, how are you planning to deal with risks to security of supply and mitigate against something like this with this project that you've got running? Energy security has got to go hand in hand with energy supply.
Yes. In our case here in Kenya, we've had the challenge was to be able to actually feed in and ensure that we could feed in such a large quantity of wind power into a relatively weak grid. So we had to do very, very extensive studies in order to make sure that by trying to provide a new source of energy into the system, we were not going to disrupt the existing generation and the capacity of the grid to carry it. So we are satisfied now. Of course, we found the bottlenecks, we found the weaker areas and the weak points, and we were able to address these. And we are now very confident that we'll be able to be part of this power generation mix without causing any distress to it.
Carlo, your biggest challenge to getting this project up and running?
The biggest challenge there have been 2 big challenges. One has been indeed the requirement of getting some kind of government comfort that would satisfy the lenders, such as government guarantees. In the end, we got a very strong letter of support, which satisfies the lenders. The second biggest challenge has been the transmission line and the risk that the transmission line brings. It's obviously a very critical item, and it is. We have an interface risk issue in ensuring that the transmission line is completed at the same time as we are ready to start production. Failing that, we would be a burden to government and to the off-taker or the transmission line owner, as we cannot delay the payment of the power as we must repay our lenders. So we would, there's this risk of the power generation station to be ready and the transmission line to be delayed. In which case it would mean that the government would be faced with having to pay for power that it's not being delivered, and therefore they don't get a revenue from it. That has been a major challenge, and we've just recently overcome that as well.
Well, Renche, just before we open up, to the audience for questions, your response to those who say we should not be writing off coal as an energy source, that we need a backup plan, even going as far as saying that the rest of the world is going to come to the party when looking at how to use coal more efficiently?
I think that's a very loaded question. At the end of the day, we have to grow our economy, and we have to grow the industries and support job creation. And in order to do that, at this point in time, I think it is a solution for this country to keep on looking at coal-fired power stations. However, more and more pressure on government, on companies, on DFIs to support projects in terms of renewables. So I'm very confident that it will overtake coal sometime soon. Maybe not in the next 5 or 10 years, maybe in 30 years, but it needs to happen.
Well, at this point, let's open up the conversation to members of the audience. So if you have any questions for our esteemed panel of guests, and of course Carlo standing by in Kenya as well, please feel free to ask them right now. We've got a roving microphone doing the rounds.
Good morning, Alishia. My name is Terry. I'm chairman of the DRC Chamber of Commerce. I want to ask a question to IDC. They've got about 100 billion for the next 5 years allocated for South Africa, and about 25 billion in renewable energy. There's any portion of that amount allocated to Africa?
Thank you for the question. The 100 billion is actually total investment for IDC, so that will include the rest of Africa as well. Our mandate and our focus is certainly to invest and develop the rest of Africa. We do believe that we can learn quite a bit, especially in renewable energy, and I would like to use the Lake Turkana as an example. IDC is a shareholder in that project. We've elected not to be a debt provider or a lender, because we would like to be a development finance institution, funding and taking risk on the equity side. So certainly our first wind project investment was actually in Kenya.
Yes, good morning. I'm Martin from MJB Consulting. I'd like one of the participants to elaborate a bit more about the regulatory issues that seem to be affecting green projects in South Africa. Thank you.
Okay, Ritesh.
Thank you, Martin. I think the regulatory issues when it comes to, and I'll focus here on renewable energy projects, I think when we started off thinking about what the best mechanism for promoting investments was, we were faced with the precedents in different countries of different mechanisms that we used. The government went ahead and with the renewable energy feed-in tariff as a price certainty to ensure that the projects get the required rate of return to be able to be financially viable. What we've now learned is that within the renewable energy feed-in tariff, we will now have competitive bidding, and that's to ensure that you have the lowest cost procurement of renewable energy while still having the price certainty of a feed-in tariff. And I think that's the route that the government's gone. There is precedent of having a renewable energy feed-in tariff and what it's done to promote renewable energy investments. That's on energy in particular, but in a broader green economy sense, I think the planned implementation of a carbon tax is the main instrument that South Africa intends to use when it comes to promoting a green economy. And what that signals to the private sector in South Africa is that it is going to be more and more expensive to be inefficient in the use of carbon emissions, and that going greener and going more sustainable will become more profitable.
Does that answer your question? Absolutely. Next.
Yes, good morning. It's Hilary Erasmus. I'd like to ask a question on Lake Turkana's wind project. If you could just elaborate on how you have overcome the transmission issue and how you've managed to coordinate the Kenyan government side of fast-tracking that transmission line, because I think it might be it could be an issue further along the line for other governments in Africa that are looking at a lot of wind, such as Morocco.
Directing that question to you, did you get the question on that end?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. Thank you. All right. When we approached the government, of course, being the sole owner of the transmission network in the country, tried as hard as they could, even inviting us on a number of occasions to various roundtables that they were organizing with donor communities to see if they could source the funding required for the transmission line. This failed in the very beginning, and therefore we requested government if they would support the idea of allowing the transmission line to be built on as a private undertaking. The government, again, very supportive, and this was a first case. They agreed to that. They had given us a concession for 25 years to own the transmission line and transfer it back to government after the 25-year period. We therefore then started, we actually developed the whole transmission line, we designed it, we did the various environmental studies on it, so when we were ready with actually going out on a tender with it, we did the tender documentation, and at a certain point we received a communication in the midst of the tender process that the government now had sourced funding for it from the Spanish government, and therefore they now wanted to take it over. Now, what is important to understand is that we always knew that this could have been a possibility and that this step-in right was available to government at any moment of the development of the transmission line. So we made very sure that we had followed all the procurement regulations, both the government of Kenya procurement regulation and World Bank procurement regulations, in order to be able to be ready to pass this on if need be, without bringing it back to the drawing board, and that the government could take it over and take it over from where we had left it. For this, we had constituted a task force, which the government accepted to participate in. We had the Ministry of Energy at the table with senior participants. We had the Kenya Power and Lighting in those days, today Kenya Power, and KETRACO being the transmission line owner in Kenya. Together, we would take decisions at this table. We would meet very regularly as we were moving along in the process of the design and the preparation of the transmission line. We were able to bring issues, or when we required for authorizations to move to the next step, we could bring it at the table, and the decision could actually be made at that table through minuted meetings, and that allows really to move very quickly. And that is, I think, pretty much a first.
Mm-hmm. Gentleman in the front.
Good morning. My name's John Bristow. I'm a geologist, so I obviously have a vested interest in things like coal and nuclear, but we have an economist here in the room this morning dealing with energy, and my question is really, we're looking at targets that are 2030, that's 19 years out. The needs that we have in South Africa for development are probably 5 and 10 years. Where are we, and why aren't we looking more at energy conservation? You know, turn off all the geysers and the lights in Sandton tonight and put them on in the morning. Where are we on energy management? And it's good that the DRC came up here, because we have a river there, the Congo, that could probably produce more hydroelectric power for this subcontinent than the rest of the world. So, you know, that's my question, a bit indirect, but have you got any comment?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, John. I'm glad you brought that up, because I agree with you that it doesn't receive the attention that it deserves. As an economist, what I'm thinking immediately is it's one of our low-cost wins. It's something that you do immediately, which gives you double or triple dividends. It helps you save money, it helps you save energy, and it helps to save carbon emissions as well. It's certainly something that I don't think we've paid enough attention to, both on a residential and disaggregated sector, as well as at an industrial level. And I think as we see the evolution of smart metering technology, of smart grids, I think it'll become a little bit easier for us to manage. But once again, we need to start thinking about the investments that we're putting into place to ensure that they're compatible with this new measure of demand-side energy management, and of ensuring that we're not wasting energy and achieving the low-cost wins that we really can. I think you're absolutely right. There's a lot more to be done here. I think it should receive a lot more attention, and I'm pretty sure it will.
Well, Renche, you've got a comment on the back of that.
I certainly appreciate the question. I think we underestimate the potential of DSM in this country. What we've done as IDC, we got a whole lot of clients, and what we're trying to do is to encourage them to invest in energy efficiency. Now, what we've realized is it's not easy to convince a company that's currently cash-strapped to really invest and put a few million rand into energy efficiency. So, for example, one of the things that we're doing, we've sourced international funding and we're putting that out at a very, very attractive interest rate at the moment, where we're targeting a 20% saving in those companies. And we match the term of the funding with the payback period and trying to encourage companies to repay from savings. We've only launched that about 2 weeks ago, and I can certainly tell the audience today, the experience to date is that there's a lot of interest at the moment, especially now during these 2 months where many companies are experiencing an increase in electricity prices. So I certainly believe in the next year or two, that's low-hanging fruit that we will see coming through quite keen.
Well, Renche, you mentioned earlier that you do have involvement in Africa and your involvement in the wind, the Turkana project specifically standing out. What are some of the other territories you're exploring at this stage?
We believe that there are a number of opportunities, especially in hydro in the rest of Africa, to a lesser extent in South Africa. In South Africa, we're looking at a few very small hydro projects. But most of our focus in the rest of Africa is specifically looking at hydro projects and also biomass. I strongly believe that there's many opportunities in biomass in the rest of Africa, where there are only a few really in South Africa when you look at biomass.
Yeah. Let's take a look at a company-specific example. We've got the likes of Sasol installing its own power generation sources, generating baseload electricity for the company's own use, and then that excess production eventually being planned to be wheeled off onto the national grid specifically. Roitesh, what kind of scope is there out there for that kind of development?
I think it's quite significant, Alishia. Renche touched on this earlier, that we need to have a proper regulatory process in place that allows the feedback of power into the grid. I think a lot of companies can see the potential of having the security of energy supply and being able to contribute to the national grid. And if you take a long-term and holistic view on what your upfront capital expenditure is and what the savings of the life cycle of the project are and the benefits from security of supply, I think these projects start becoming a lot more attractive. And in our experience in working with our clients, particularly the resource-intensive clients, cogeneration is becoming one of the key components to ensure electricity supply is secure, but at the same time you're managing your costs and you're managing emissions as well.
Carlo, is this something that's taking flight in Kenya as well? Do you see this being a trend over on that end?
Sorry, I didn't hear your full question.
Carlo, just looking at cogeneration projects and independent companies looking to generate their own internal capacity, is that a trend that's taking flight in Kenya?
I think it is. It is coming in, not fully as yet, but I know there are serious talks about it, and due consideration is being given to that. Yes.
Okay, well, that's certainly a development that is taking stride. Your view on something like that progressing and the potential it opens up for the energy space on the continent, not just in South Africa?
There's a significant potential. I think in South Africa, just to quickly comment on that, the biggest challenge is the regulatory side, and for companies really to get a PPA at the right price. The other challenge in the rest of Africa is that many companies can get electricity from a hydro. However, it makes sense to go in terms of cogeneration. We are looking at supporting companies and trying to develop feasibility studies around cogeneration to support the efficiency.
Well, with government's previous position having been, Roitesh, that 30% of electrical capacity should come from IPPs, 70% from Eskom, and now with the integrated resources plan yet to pinpoint those allocations, there's a threat that many fear coming to bear on smaller players, that they may well be forced out of this system. Is Eskom playing enough of a space or a game in the renewable energy space?
Alishia, I think it's tricky. There's a place for Seckam to play its role, and Seckam is coming to the party. We've seen the 100-megawatt solar plant and the 100-megawatt wind power station, and I think that is very important because what it does is it helps disseminate technology. It helps remove the early project risks by demonstrating that projects like this are viable in South Africa. At the same time, I think, as I mentioned earlier, the development of an independent systems and market operator is important because it puts the governance structures in place to promote renewable energy investments. And I think there's a place for Seckam to play, and I think Seckam is doing what it can given its constraints. But I think we will see, given what we've seen, the conversation we've had today in terms of promoting private sector development, that IPPs will start to play an important role, and small projects within those will start coming to the fore.
Well, that's where we're going to have to leave that conversation for this morning. Thank you for joining us today. Of course, my guests with me here at the KPMG headquarters in Johannesburg, Rohitesh Dhawan, he's a resource economist at KPMG, Rencha van Tonder, who's the head of the Green Industry Strategic Business Unit at the IDC, and joining us from our studios in Kenya has been Carlo van Wangeningen, who's chairman at the Lake Turkana Wind Power Consortium over in Kenya. And that's where we leave this third part of the Africa Conversation Series here at KPMG. Until next time, from me, Alishia Seckam, goodbye.